ever said yes when you have to continuously say no?
So, like you asked, boundaries are nothing but certain limits that we set for our own selves and communicate it to others. Time-related boundaries. Has it happened to you ever? Somebody will call and they will say, I'm going to take 2 minutes of your time. And that 2 minutes is becoming half an hour and the other person is not showing any sign of maybe disconnecting the call.
Absolutely.
Imagine you're today feeling low. Maybe a colleague of yours means well, comes and asks you, is everything okay? And then let's say you say, I need my space and I'll get back to you if there is anything that I wish to, share. But if the person is insisting that no, I'm your best friend, we've been working with each other for many years, tell me what happens. Somewhere maybe the other person is not in a position to understand. Domestic violence was the number one the reason why women thought the only way to escape violence was to burn themselves, or an individual side could be, we need to set boundaries means what? Have we taken time to reflect on our needs? And those needs must determine what my boundaries are going to be.
Hello and welcome to South First Health for You. I am Chetna Belgire. Have you ever said yes when you have to continuously say no? Have you ever felt guilty when you have actually said no to that person and then wondered, did I say the right thing? Did I do the right thing? There is something called as boundaries. Today, to discuss that, which is very important in everybody's life, and most of us fail to do that. Today we have with us Dr. Ashwini N, who is the founder of Mukta Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. This is a topic which, I'm sure a lot of us, including myself, is really interested and should know, probably not even wanting to know, should know.
Absolutely.
On how to set boundaries. But before we go there, first of all, let's talk about what is boundaries. What do we actually mean by boundaries?
I think, like you said, Chetna, it's an extremely important topic. A lot of problems can be prevented if people just understand what are boundaries. So, like you asked, boundaries are nothing but certain limits that we set for our own selves and communicate it to others, so that there is absolute clarity on which behaviors are acceptable in a particular relationship, which type of interaction is acceptable and which are not. So boundaries are essentially limits that we set.
Okay. So this is like, limits that we set for ourselves and limits which we set for the other person also. Right?
So there can also be intrapersonal boundaries. For example, when you say, weekly, at least 5 times I'm going to exercise. Now you see, that's a boundary that you're setting with your own self. And let's say when we tell others, beyond 9 o'clock, I wouldn't encourage work-related calls or I will not be texting you back. Now that's an interpersonal boundary. So fundamentally, let's know that boundaries can be something that we set within our own self. Then it's going to become intrapersonal in nature. And when we set boundaries with people, with others, then it becomes interpersonal boundaries.
So are there like different types of boundaries?
Yes.
If there are, then if you could explain with some examples.
Let's say first one we will take up, something that we more often than not neglect to acknowledge it as boundary. This is called temporal boundary. The word temporal means time-related boundaries. Has it happened to you ever? Somebody will call and they will say, I'm going to take 2 minutes of your time. And that 2 minutes is becoming half an hour and the other person is not showing any sign of maybe disconnecting the call.
Absolutely.
So now you see, that's an example of time-related boundary. Or somebody might say, I'm going to be here at 9:30 and 10:30 you're giving them a call and they're like, I'm on my way. That means somewhere these individuals are not respecting the time-related boundaries. That's the first type of boundary. The second type of boundary maybe we need to talk about is the physical boundary. Many times you've heard cases of sexual harassment at workplace. Now, every time there is sexual harassment where there is contact form, unnecessary touch, unaccepted touch, that's a violation of the physical boundary. Now, another type of boundary can also be emotional boundary.
Okay, I think that's very important.
Yes,
I guess.
absolutely. Imagine you're today feeling low. Maybe a colleague of yours means well, comes and asks you, is everything okay? And then let's say you say, I need my space and I'll get back to you if there is anything that I wish to, the share. But if the person is insisting that no, I'm your best friend, we've been working with each other for many, many years, tell me what happens. Somewhere maybe the other person is not in a position to understand the emotional boundaries that you're setting, with the other person. So we've spoken about temporal boundary, then we have physical boundary, emotional boundary, and now comes cognitive boundary. Cognitive boundaries are, let's say, somewhere, let's say both of us are colleagues.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe over the lunch break, I shared some idea with you regarding how maybe a podcast can be made or something like that.
Okay.
So that was my idea.
Yeah.
Imagine there is a meeting, and then you talk about it as your idea.
Oh, very interesting.
This is a cognitive boundary violation.
Okay.
All the copyrights, intellectual property rights, we have those laws in our country so that nobody violates cognitive ideology related boundaries at times. Maybe the last one that we can speak of is what's called material boundary.
Okay.
Material boundaries, has that happened to you, Chetna? I hope not. Let's say you're typing something on your text, on your mobile. Somebody just looks at it as if it's their own mobile.
Yeah, in our field especially very important, I guess.
So now you see, that's seeing, something that belongs to you. But there are people, even without realizing, they're using your pen, water bottle, and we may think that what a big deal. But at the end of the day, something that does not belong to us, unless we have the consent from the other party that we can use it, if we continue to use it, you see what's happened? That would be a material related boundary violation.
Very interesting, because all of these boundaries that you've said, I think in everybody's life, in the 24 hours they have, I'm sure at least once or twice you would have crossed those boundaries, and you've let the other person also cross those boundaries. For me, what was in this one particular thing when you were explaining, when you spoke about emotional boundary, I wanted to know in a family environment, or when you're in a setup of a family or a spouse or a friend or a love affair.
Okay.
So how does emotional bound, if you can go a little more detail in this particular boundary, to explain about, I will later ask you those questions in particular, but then this one particular thing I wanted to know, is there anything different in terms of setting emotional boundaries? Because we end up dying of guilt. For me, that's been a major concern. Whenever I've set boundary, first of all, to realize that there is this boundary I have to set, I've taken time. But then after setting that boundary, there's this guilt which sets in. So, if you could just speak about the emotional boundary itself in detail.
Okay. Say, for example, sometimes I've seen mothers, let's say they're tired, and the child comes and asks, shall we play? Or the child is asking continuously for mother's attention. Imagine if the mother says, just give me 15 minutes, I need to rest. Is that too much to ask? Not really, right? I think for all, that 15 minutes, it's needed to absolutely get reset or at the energy levels. Now imagine you set the boundary, you communicate it with the child, but then if you end up feeling guilty about 15 minutes that you have asked, and if guilt is eating you up, then does that mean that you are honoring the boundary that you set for your own self? No, right? So somewhere when we set boundaries, let there be absolute clarity about why did I set this boundary. For all it's needed for your well-being. And when you are prioritizing your well-being, let there not be this narrative that it is being selfish. Instead, setting boundaries and being able to communicate the same with others is one of the ways that we know the person prioritizes self-care.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I, like you said, Chetna, I think it's very, very difficult for people to set boundaries, especially in intimate relationships.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Right.
especially with related to tiredness, because our well-being more often than not is actually related to rest also. No?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think we need to talk about this without hesitation. Let's say it's a spousal relationship, it's a romantic relationship. Let's say this person is really tired and maybe the partner is initiating sexual intimacy. And let's say the other partner who's really tired is saying, you know what, I'm too tired. Let's not engage sexually. Is that too much to ask for? And if the other partner is not respectful of this boundary, out of tiredness, somebody is telling no. Now you see, all the boundaries will now overlap.
Right.
At one time, it's time-related boundary violation, emotional boundary violation, and also physical boundary violation.
Right.
It shall become. So in life as a whole, sometimes the boundaries, would overlap in how they're going to play out. But first and foremost, when we set boundaries within our own mind, let us be very clear about why am I setting this boundary, so that once you've communicated it, let there not be any guilt in the process.
Okay, okay. So ma'am, when you're talking about, this particular example that you gave actually gives me this doubt whether, how different is then consent from setting boundaries? Are they different at all, or are they just the same?
I would say they are interrelated.
Okay.
Now, consent is the way you execute boundary.
Okay.
Say, for example, I have set a boundary in my mind. Now I have communicated it and I'm asking, I have told you this, do I have your agreement? Imagine, let's say we are colleagues, we don't work on Sundays, let's say, but then we have a deadline, and therefore both of us will agree that only this Sunday we will still be working. And you say, look, I'm saying yes to only this Sunday, 9 to 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's a consent that I'm asking and you are giving.
Right.
So the way we can understand consent is nothing but it's an agreement between two individuals. So there are two parties here. One person who is seeking consent and the other person who is giving consent. And in this agreement, what we are doing is, one, I'm setting a boundary, I'm communicating that to you, okay? And the other person is recognizing it and respecting it.
Right.
So consent are a way to execute the boundary that we set.
Okay. So then, so when we set boundaries to ourselves, then first of all, this whole thought of, or the whole the process of setting boundaries, does it actually start when we grow up, like as we grow up, or do we like learn it once we are exposed to a certain things? How does that happen? Like when do we actually start doing this? Is there any at this age you need to start setting boundaries? Because I've noticed it becomes very difficult for a lot of people to set boundaries. Again, I'm coming back to home and family and things like that, because again you're wondering whether this is okay, it's not okay, and what exactly is boundary. Sometimes you just let them do things, right?
So true.
Even taking care of elderly parents, because they may be panicking, they may call you continuously to tend to them, but you are in some other thing and you know that they can manage, but yet you are there because they're asking for it. So sometimes that also, like if you can give me examples of first of all, when do we start setting boundaries?
Sure. Yeah. I think we need to look at this as a life skill. And will children learn very early on it's okay to violate boundaries or we must respect boundaries? Absolutely yes. A lot of our understanding of boundaries and whether we respect it or we think, hey, it's okay, it's family only, we can, but taking for granted, no, I think that begins very early on. Children are learning about boundaries by observing the way parents are interacting with each other or the entire family. Like say for example, why am I saying this boundary management? We need to start teaching children very early on. Think about it. If there are two children, siblings, when a parent says you cannot be hitting the other, indirectly aren't we teaching physical boundaries? We are telling that there might be certain differences between both of you, but you need to sort it out without hitting each other.
Right.
That's an example of physical boundary that we are teaching children. Or when we say, we are going to our relative's house, what is not your toy, you should not ask that I'm going to take it back home. Indirectly, what are we teaching?
Yeah.
Material boundary. Or when we say, I'm going to take rest for 15 minutes and after that I'm going to come back and play with you. Indirectly, we are teaching time-related boundary. And the most important thing, I think very important, let's say body autonomy. When we are telling children, do not allow anybody to touch your private parts, or nobody should touch your body in a secretive manner, indirectly we are teaching children physical boundaries and how anytime it's violated you need to come and report. That's an indication that we are teaching children.
Yeah.
So sometimes parents are teaching boundaries, but what we need to also recognize is more than what we teach children are also observing how do we as adults are managing, the boundaries between our own self. So that's about the importance of starting early. But the other important thing that you checked, ma'am, is, let's say with our parents, maybe there is a concern, and let's say you are at work and they're continuously calling, and then you pick the call. It has happened with me. I've seen 5 missed calls and then I'm like, oh my God, what's happened? And then I call, sometimes my mother is like, Uta aita? Did you have your lunch? And I was concerned about you. Now the idea is, I know it comes from a place of being concerned about your well-being, but the panic it gives you. Now I would definitely say gently, but firmly. It's absolutely okay to also tell whoever it is, spouse, our parents, children, in-laws, our superiors, that, let's say, unless it's an emergency, you giving me 5 calls is actually making me very nervous about, what's happening. Leave me a message if at all it's not emergency. However, let's say we set a boundary, but for some reason, let's say it's an emergency. I've seen some people who will say after 9, I will not answer the call. 10 times our colleague has called and we've still not answered the call. Now here, we need to really differentiate between, is that boundary violation or is that boundary crossing?
Okay.
Imagine you've set a boundary, no calls after 9, okay? Or much before that, I think it's better, no calls after maybe 6:30 or something. But if it's an emergency, and the person did call way after the time-related boundary that you set, you, for once checking if everything is okay, we cannot look at it as a boundary violation. Instead, it's a boundary crossing that we did only to ensure everything is managed, all the more when it's an emergency. But if these boundary crossings keep on happening because the other person is taking for granted, then we may have to reset and defend it well. But once in a while, out of necessity and urgency and importance, if we are violating a boundary that you've set and the other party accepted also, it's okay. It may not be violation, it might be a useful boundary crossing.
Okay. So when we talk about this boundaries itself, like, are there any particular way the person has grown up or, has been brought up in a particular kind of family or anything of that sort which influences one boundary violation or, difficulty in setting boundaries also? Like, I want to understand 2 types. One is, who are the people who find it very difficult to set boundaries? And the second thing is, who are the people who find it okay to cross boundaries all the time? So
look at that. I think that is like a jam-packed, packed question. I think too many things, that we may have to. Now, sometimes, in certain families, they look at enmeshment as love. Like, say, for example, somebody might be like, I love you. So even if I cross boundaries, that only shows that we are intimate or close with each other.
Right.
This is called enmeshment. Enmeshment is, I've seen some couples being offended with each other, when they say, let's say a person likes one team, cricket team, and the other party is like, no, I don't like that team. And they're like, but we love each other, we are a family, and how is it that we have different interests? Now, this is an indication of enmeshment. Enmeshment essentially is these boundaries are so diffused. So diffuse that there is hardly any boundary. Right. And when we make it seem like lack of boundary is intimacy, there is a danger to autonomy. People lose their identities. For example, families saying, the entire family will vote for a same political party. Why? These are not family votes.
Okay.
These are individual votes. Okay. But when people say, no, as a family, you need to vote for this party only. Right. You see that ideological boundary, there is no concept of that in that family. Yeah. So this is called enmeshment. Yeah. The opposite of enmeshment is rigid boundaries, wherein we have built walls. Let's say I'm telling, Chetna, let's say both of us are siblings, and then I'm telling Chetna, I've developed headache. Enmeshment would be you as a sister telling Ashwini, when you develop headache, I love you so much that I too feel like having a headache. Now, who will make both of us coffee? But rigid boundary would be, Ashwini, it's your head. Why are you even telling it to me? But ideally, how should things be? Boundaries must be permeable.
Okay.
Permeable is, I respect your boundary, but there are times that we need to keep it flexible, adaptable, permeable, and that's the healthy form of boundary. This is one. The other thing that you asked is, who are these people who constantly violate others' boundaries and don't even feel guilty about it?
Right.
And who are those people who find it extremely difficult to just set boundaries? Yeah. Let's look at our personalities on a continuum. Yeah. On one hand, we have people who are submissive,
right,
or passive, who don't set boundaries, or even if they set boundaries, they'll communicate it, there is a doubt. And even after communicating, they feel very, very guilty,
Right.
And after communicating, if somebody is violating that boundaries, they don't take action. So those who find it difficult to set boundaries are usually on the submissive side of personality.
Okay.
Yeah. The extreme opposite of this are people who are aggressive. And the reason for this aggressive personality orientation could be narcissism, or maybe they were brought up in an environment where they may think that a particular gender has every right to be aggressive. Sometimes patriarchy also makes a certain gender think that it's okay, So people who are on the aggressive side of personality, maybe they may set boundaries very well with others, but will they respect others' boundaries? That's questionable.
What about trauma? Does that also play a role in people setting, very rigid boundaries or not having boundaries at all?
Yeah, quite possible. Trauma, it affects our sense of safety and trust in people, in the world, right? So we cannot say it would only oscillate towards setting rigid boundaries, but sometimes it could also oscillate towards setting very, very diffused boundaries or no boundaries at all. Right. For example, research is talking about how, just one example of the consequence of sexual trauma in the childhood sometimes could be somebody becoming hypersexual.
Okay.
Can happen. That could be a way that they assert their own sexual identity. Sometimes that can happen.
Okay.
So, and in that process, they may not be setting firm sexual boundaries. That can happen.
Okay.
On the other hand, it could also go the other way around, wherein they may develop extreme fear towards sexual intimacy itself. So much so that it feels like there is a rigid boundary. Yeah, so it can oscillate any which way. Not saying that everyone who's gone through sexual trauma would have this sort of extreme responses, But there is a possibility. I use this example to just say how trauma can result sometimes in a person setting too diffused boundary as a no boundary at all at times, or may set
Very
extremely rigid boundaries. But to heal, to be healthy would be to set what I said, the permeable boundaries. And usually people who are assertive are able to set permeable boundary, wherein I will not violate other boundaries like aggressive individuals may do, but at the same time I will not allow others to violate my boundaries.
Okay.
So
I think the basic question now I'm going to ask you is, how do we identify if somebody is actually crossing my boundary? One is, maybe we'll first talk about how do we set boundaries? Like, are there any particular ways to set boundaries?
Okay.
And if you can give some real life examples at different scenarios, like maybe at home, with friends, with spouse, with workplace. I think these are some which I can think of, but if there are any more, you can even throw some light on that. How do we set boundaries?
Sure. In fact, boundary management, it's a two-way process.
Right.
See, one is from my side what I said, and the other party must respect it.
Right.
So whenever we are talking about boundaries, we need to look at it as a two-way process. Imagine in a family, I keep setting boundaries and the other person disrespects it. Then what's the whole point in me setting boundaries in the very first place?
Right.
Yeah. So I'll talk about it as a two-way process.
Sure.
Yeah. The first step from my side, or an individual side could be, we need to set boundaries means what? Have we taken time to reflect on our needs? Okay. And those needs must determine what my boundaries are going to be. For example, let's say, a parent recognizes that in the hurry-burry of my life, I'm not paying attention to my physical health. Setting boundaries would mean what? I'm saying at least 3 times a week, I need to exercise for 1 hour at least. So you set in your own mind that 3 days is okay. 1 hour each is not too much that I'm asking from my family also. And why do I need it? This is so that I remain healthy for my own self and for the family.
Okay.
So whenever we are setting boundaries, like I said, setting boundaries is an intrapersonal process. It's happening within me. I need to take time out to reflect on what is my need and what is the underlying value. Yeah.
Right.
The next step after setting is communicating.
That's very important.
Very important.
We rarely communicate. Maybe we might set it, but we rarely probably communicate.
And how will the other parties know about it? Imagine I did not say it. And if I don't communicate, but I'm angry, imagine I tell you, you don't understand me at all, you don't understand my needs or what. Now the other person may not understand our needs. So it's very important that we have value clarity on why am I setting this boundary. And with absolute clarity, let us also communicate it. For instance, I can tell, for an example, let's say with my spouse, I could say, the other day you told me that we will go out so that both of us can sort out that disagreement that we had because we couldn't do it at home. But then I kept waiting and you did not come. Yeah. So first tell factually what has happened. The other day we had agreed upon that we will go out, have this discussion when children are not there. So this is a fact. Agreement was a fact, and the fact that that person did not turn up at the agreed time is a fact. So always state the fact, which is verifiable. Sometimes what do? We don't state facts. Instead, we will say, you and your responsibility.
Right.
So first state facts, what you've seen for real, and then communicate how did it make you feel. When we've agreed upon a time to discuss and sort out our differences, and when you do not respect that, I feel extremely hurt. I also get upset, angry. Tell, yeah? And then talk about what do you expect their behavior to be. When I get hurt and angry, I wonder whether you respect me, but can at least the next time, can you please respect your own commitment? For that's good for our relationship. Something like this, gently but firmly.
Okay.
We can communicate it. Also, if need be, also state the consequences. What will happen? And then if the other person violates it, defend it firmly, reiterate it.
Okay. And that needs to happen at every step, because that has to be reinstated, I guess.
So set boundaries, communicate it. After communicating, you need to honor it yourself.
Right.
And how do we honor it? If the other party violates it, you need to defend it.
Okay.
Sometimes what we do now, and we sometimes think whatever said and done, nothing will happen. If we
person
give up,
is like that.
that person is like that, then that person will become like that.
Yeah.
The other person, see, this line that I have read, Chetna, it stayed in my heart for so long. The idea is when you set, communicate and defend boundaries, you are teaching the other person how do you wish to be treated.
Absolutely.
And it should not change. It may take time because maybe that person has had their own childhood,
Right.
Maybe we don't know the background. But when you are consistent with the way you defend it, gently but firmly, in a way, not in a way, actually directly you're teaching the other person, this is the way I wish to be treated. This is from our side. Now, the responsibility is also on the other party. No,
Right.
What should the other party do? When we set a boundary, the other person, first of all, should have the ability to recognize it.
Right. Yeah.
And to recognize, people must have two things. One is listening.
Yeah.
Imagine you said 4 o'clock, let's have a discussion.
Yeah.
The person said yes. If they didn't listen to the timings only,
Yeah.
then what's the whole point?
Right.
Yeah. Ability to recognize that comes through listening and observation. And after I have recognized, I must also have the attitude to respect what I have observed.
True.
And if at all, unknowingly you violated somebody's boundary, what should the other person do?
I think
Have the
apologize.
humility to rectify it.
Right.
Have the humility to rectify. If only these 6 things are there, only then can there be respectful boundary management. And I think this is applicable in all areas of life.
Okay.
Let us not make a mistake that in intimate relationship, in families, boundaries, how can it be? These are all professional matters. I don't think so. What doesn't start at home, suddenly it will not manifest in a workplace or a public place.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely. So, when you're talking about, I want to know, how do we actually recognize that somebody is
Okay.
crossing our boundaries?
Yeah. Pay attention to your feelings. Sometimes it could result in the form of discomfort. Imagine during COVID times, we need to relearn that my bottle is my bottle, yours is yours.
Right.
Imagine as simple as if somebody is taking your water bottle, sometimes we are uncomfortable,
Right.
but then we brush it off. It's neither is good for you nor for the other person. Yeah. So watch out for any signs of discomfort.
Okay.
Yeah. Secondly, also see in the short term and in the long term, is it contributing to your well-being? Yeah. Say, for example, you're a working mom and Sunday is the only day that you get to maybe have that 1 hour of extra sleep. Sometimes that in itself feels like a luxury, no? You communicating it to the family that, look, every day there is a routine. But Sunday, 1 hour of extra sleep for all you know feels rejuvenating.
Right.
Yeah. So that's important for your well-being. And if somebody suddenly makes all the noise on a Sunday only,
Or plans the
or
day.
plans that day only, and the day is starting early, that's an indication that they are not able to prioritize your well-being. If they are not able to, who should take the lead step in rectifying it? You be that person. So look out for discomfort, look out if your well-being is getting compromised, and also look out if the safety in itself is compromised, especially so relevant when it comes to harassment at workplace and so on. It's directly indicative of our safety being compromised. I think we need to pay attention to our feelings to see sometimes if our boundaries are violated, or if you're feeling that it is violated, then let's check in and ask, what are my feelings?
Okay. So with this, with this whole thing about setting boundaries, and sometimes that itself becomes like too much of a task to do. You have set boundaries. Now you are trying to kind of, keep up to that boundaries. Like you said, the rigid boundaries, or it could even be a healthy boundary itself. But can it actually go to an extent of getting isolated? Because you've set so many boundaries that you're actually going towards isolation, especially in this age, when people are trying to kind of, the youngsters especially, when they want to not socialize as much and things like that. So can this be a problem?
It can become a problem if the person is actually, like you said, has set rigid boundaries. See, the idea is, first we need to have the right awareness of what boundaries are. See, boundaries are that space where I can respect my own self and the other person. If the person only says, I'm going to guard my boundaries and I don't care about you, then there is every risk that eventually this person can become isolated. But if the idea is, we are interpersonal beings, we are social beings, we live with people in our homes. And now if there is this understanding that boundaries are to ensure my safety, my well-being is honored, as well as the other person's, then we'll continue to set adaptable boundaries. But if the boundaries become so rigid that I know of people who will switch off their mobiles, and I've also seen cases where somebody else, in the face of an emergency, they've been trying to contact, but then this person was not available because there is rigidity. Remember, we spoke about boundary violation is different, but boundary crossing sometimes is needed. So let's look at boundaries as bridges between people that gives clarity to the nature of interaction that we will have. But without this, I know of people who made boundaries seem like walls. So much so that, that interpersonal amicability is not there anymore.
Right.
There is that risk.
Ma'am, now it's going to be a little different the way I want you to answer this question. Let's look at different scenarios and put ourselves in those scenarios and see if, how do we, I'm not giving you examples, you can give me examples, but I'm going to just tell you between two people, like, we will go at different scenarios.
Sure.
Like if you're somebody who's trying to, set boundary with parents, let's start there with parents. Then from your, you've been counseling and you've seen so many people coming to you with issues. So what is the most difficult thing to do when you're setting boundaries with parents?
Parents, let's say you're an adult, you have a partner.
Right.
No parent can demand and command that, you need to tell me everything that's happening between you two.
Right.
Now you see, they mean well. But at the end of the day, you are two independent adults having your own intimate relationship. But a lot of times in Indian families, both parents and in-laws, they may think they're trying to resolve a concern between the couple. But for all, that's not helping. Instead, that is intrusive in nature. Now you see, this is really a boundary concern. No? Now imagine these two people who are partners, husband and wife, let's say, they're having some issues, maybe, which maybe the parents are able to see. But they need to check, would you require any support or intervention? And in the event that, the children say, no, we don't want, we will sort it ourselves. In respecting that, we've actually respected the boundary that this couple has set. So in Indian families, it's very important to recognize subsystems. You know, there is a spousal subsystem,
Yeah.
there is a sibling subsystem also. Imagine, because we talked about parents, sometimes parents interfering in every matter between siblings. Why? Even children, they will sort it out. Maybe you give them certain guidance, but as they are aging, for everything you need not, because that would actually be boundary concern. So therefore, even with parents, they mean well, we know that. But boundaries are something that when children said, parents must respect it. And also children must not feel guilty also. Finance related also, no? Maybe somebody is an adult, they are financially literate, you know, and where they spend, where they invest. Sometimes it's not necessary that we keep taking consent from the parents, especially if the parent is not that well aware of maybe the newer trends of financial investment. Yeah, the position by default should not make anybody to think that no, I must have a say in the matter, especially if we are looking at adult children.
Right. So now my next is, you know, when we do it with spouse, like what is the most difficult boundary to set between the couple? It could be a romantic relationship, or it could be, you know, husband and wife.
I think when you said which is the most, I hope I will not disappoint you by telling in intimate relationship, because of the nature of intimacy, no? Setting any boundary at times might seem challenging. So we need to start from the word go. You know, what I mean is, intimacy is such that sometimes people may think boundaries blurring in itself is intimacy. But for a successful, intimate partner relationship, be it, you know, it could be a live-in relationship, dating relationship, or marital relationship, does not matter. All the boundaries that we have said, ma'am, discussed earlier, that needs to be honored, and only then will it be a thriving relationship. Imagine marriage happens and we take each other's time for granted. Maybe when we were dating, 2 o'clock meant 2 o'clock. But once you're married, 2 o'clock is like, hey, I live with that person, why should I? You know, that's the beginning of all conflicts. No? The same thing, even financial boundaries. Sometimes people in romantic relationship or marital relationship, we don't discuss finance and set boundaries. There is a taken for granted idea that, hey, somehow we'll manage. See, when it's working, it's working. But when there is a concern, that's when we should not look and say, hey, I wish we had this discussion. What I mean is there clarity on how much money together will pool in for savings? Is there clarity on who pays for which expenditure? Just that dialogue will also give financial clarity, and that clarity is nothing but setting boundaries. Imagine there is this understanding that this year you save, next year I shall save, and I shall take care of all. Isn't that a boundary that we are setting? And when we honor, the families will thrive. The same thing even with emotional boundaries. You know, emotional boundaries. Partners respecting professional boundaries are equally important. Imagine, let's say I'm a psychologist, and if my spouse keeps on asking, tell me about some interesting case that you dealt with, I am bound by my codes of conduct professionally. I cannot be, you know. So in intimate relationship, people think about boundaries when there are conflicts. It's so unfortunate. I think what we need to really be emphasizing is, let's have a preventive approach to our partnership. That means way before conflicts come, can we sit and have a dialogue on what behaviors are acceptable and what behaviors are not acceptable? For instance, maybe a couple can decide, we have a child now, and as parents, we will be the primary people who will take decisions about parenting. Of course, grandparents are there. They will be supportive, they will be involved in the life of the child, but decisions regarding parenting will be a couple dialogue. Now you see, this is actually in a way an emotional boundary, a cognitive boundary,
Right.
that you are setting. So having conversations on boundaries, it's very important to prevent problems
Right.
before they occur.
So the next one I want to ask is between friendships. Like there are different kinds of friendship. One is a group where you are, friends with different people, but you're all in the same group.
Okay.
Three scenarios. One is that. The other one is same gender friendship, where you have your best friend is a male, you are a male and you have a male friend, and then there is a woman and who has a friend who's another woman. So same gender relationships. So I want to understand in these three scenarios, what is difficult? When does it become very difficult to set boundaries? One is group, then the same genders.
I think when people have not set boundaries, any place will be a problematic
That's
place for
definitely
sure.
Right.
For sure. See, we cannot predict that this is a difficult relationship. This is not.
Thing is, what
Instead-
I've noticed is when you're in a group, there are these priorities of, because you connect at different levels with different people, right? When you're in a group.
Okay.
So then, setting boundaries to say that, okay, I cannot do a certain thing for you, but instead I can do it for another person.
Okay.
So then how do you deal with that?
Okay,
Because
that's so
It's
interesting.
a dynamic, right? It's a group
Dynamics. Okay,
yeah.
good that you gave me this example. Now I wish to, based on this question, if I'm elaborating, don't take me wrong, Chetana. Remember we spoke about consent,
Right.
Which is an agreement. There is this concept called implied consent. What is this implied consent? Imagine I and you are friends. Okay. One example I'm taking. Maybe a third party has seen I and you behave in a particular manner.
Absolutely. Yeah.
For example, let's say I've asked for money and then you said, take. That which the other person has seen. Now, this was a consent between whom? Between you and me. Now, what if the other person thinks, Chetana said yes to Ashwini for lending money. Now, by default, it implies that she will also be okay with lending money to me. Now, is this an ideal form of consent? No.
Right.
This is implied consent. In groups, sometimes what can happen is implied consent can play out at three levels. Yeah. Imagine I have seen certain behavior. Yeah. Or let's say one day I asked, Chetna, can you give me a pen? And you said, Ashwini, take it. Good that I asked consent and then you gave it. But tomorrow, I'm not asking. I'm thinking, yesterday,
She was okay.
she was okay giving me something. Today also, it is okay. I'm not paying attention to your circumstances. Maybe last week I was okay to come to a movie. But today I'm going through something in my family which I'm not willing to share it with you. We could be good friends, but it is still something that I don't. But if I assume last week she was okay, this week also she's okay, now that's implied consent, which is not an ideal form of consent.
Okay.
Yeah. So three things can happen in implied consent. I think in many groups and in most relationships, this would be the problem of assumptions.
Right.
Just because an individual is okay with something, then the person will be okay with anything. Maybe you are okay to give me your pen, but not okay with giving me your mobile phone, no?
Right.
Yeah. The other thing is maybe at one point you are okay with something, that does not mean you will be okay with it all the time.
Right.
And the third thing, I think based on your question, let's say we're all in a group, you're okay with me for a particular behavior, but that does not by default mean you would be okay with that behavior with everyone. We've seen this happen especially in workplaces.
Right.
Maybe one colleague is okay to hug another colleague. That does not mean this person is okay to hug anybody and everybody.
Right.
But if the third party is looking at this interaction and assuming that a person is okay to hug me also, that's consent totally gone wrong.
Yes.
This is called implied consent, which is no form of consent.
Okay. So when you talk about same relationship friendships. Again, like you said, it also, whatever you've given the example, I think holds good there as well. But I want to understand that when there are two friends who are very close to each other, it could be of any gender maybe, but sometimes even there you need boundaries, right? Because I've shared everything with you. I'm okay with telling you everything and anything, and I'm really not hurt by that. Or I'm okay with you delaying in certain, like maybe I've told you 2 o'clock you come, you'll come at 2:30 or whatever. So there are so many things I'm okay with because you're my best friend, and that's the tag which I have, and I can't like let go of that. So in such scenarios, what are some of the things that we need to be very careful about?
So till which point are you okay? This is when, taking for granted comes into the picture. See, out of our empathy, out of genuine empathy towards the other person's circumstances, maybe we are like, that's okay. That means you're being permeable. You are being adaptable. But is that person also reciprocating the same to you? Because all relationships are supposed to be reciprocal in nature. Nobody should only be the giver and the other person the receiver. It should also be vice versa. So I would strongly recommend, don't overlook the discomfort even in close relationships. Over a period of time, what it can do is it can breed unconscious conflicts. Okay, you're my best friend. Maybe I'm not assertive enough to let you know that your behavior is disturbing me because I don't want to acknowledge it myself also. And over a period of time, you suppress. You never really know that discomfort could take on the form of avoidance, or that discomfort could even take on the form of suddenly you snapping at that person. Right. So what I would suggest is pay attention. Close or not close. Pay attention to what is the other person's behavior making you feel. Yes, when we are close, we are willing to overlook. But in that process, we are suppressing that emotion. Right. And anything that is suppressed, like that spring, you suppress, you really don't know the way it may bounce back. Right. And then things may really go out of control.
So what about workplace? This is the last scenario which I want you to give me a, it's very important to set boundaries. 100%. Many people do not understand that, there is also fear, right? Because in other scenarios, it's you're only dealing with your personal relationship and things like that. But when it comes to workplace, suddenly there is so many things involved. Your job is at stake. Correct. You have multiple levels of seniority which you're dealing with, or even a person junior to you. You don't know how to communicate and how it could go wrong. So in such scenarios, why is it very important to set boundaries, and how do you do that effectively?
See, ultimately, if we do not set, communicate and defend it, your productivity will be at stake. See, imagine, I have seen some professionals, in the name of being in the good books of people, they keep doing others' job and they end up not doing their own job well. Now, the technical term is role clarity. But for us to have role clarity, there should be role-related boundaries in the very first place. I've seen it in so many organizations. Some people think the more I help others, that's the word, the more I help others and get that acknowledgement that I'm a very helpful person, I'll professionally grow. You may gain the experience, but in that experience gaining endeavor, what if you get burnt out? Right. People a lot work based, why do we say 8 hours is the work? Because that's maybe the maximum people can take, because you also need other 8 hours to sleep, other 8 hours for managing other areas of life. But if you yourself say, no, I'll do everybody's role because I want to grow professionally, what you are thinking as being helpful to others, maybe you're doing it for recognition, but in the long run, you are not acknowledging your own limitations, and that could really lead to burnout. So one example is, if you don't have role-related boundaries, role clarity won't be there. Right. You don't know what is your task and what is others, and there is a real risk of burnout. Right. And secondly, it's a myth that the more we accommodate, we are going to be recognized in a workplace. We don't want more and more accommodation, because in you accommodating what everybody is asking, you're making people sometimes lazy, no?
Yeah.
Because they may be like, imagine I am this accommodating teddy bear sort of a person. Maybe 5 people are like, hey, Ashwini will do.
Right.
But in that process, what would happen to them?
Yeah.
So the need of the hour is collaboration at a workplace. You know, when I need support, will the other parties be there? And I'll also be there for others.
Okay.
Yeah. So lack of boundaries is a clear indication that there is really no collaborative spirit in the organization. Because collaboration will acknowledge my capacity and will also acknowledge others' capacity. Collaboration will acknowledge my boundaries and it will also recognize others' boundaries. So I think that collaborative spirit, when it's part of the work culture, implicit in that is also the 6th process of boundary management that we have said. No, people will be comfortable to set boundaries, communicate boundaries, defend it, and all other parties will also be in a position to recognize it, respect it, and if by chance we violate it, the humility to also rectify it.
Okay. Suppose I've set boundaries, I've told it to the person, it's working fine for some days maybe, and then you see that it's really not working. Like the other person is not respecting those boundaries, even after communicating to them multiple times. So then what does the other person do? Like, because you can set boundaries for yourself.
Correct.
Like, what if, like you said, that other 3 is also very important, but that's not happening. So then how do you deal with this? Do you move away? Is the relationship going to turn toxic?
Okay.
What do you do then?
Yeah. First, let's reiterate.
Okay.
First step, let's reiterate. Meaning, maybe the person forgot or didn't understand. We will give it a try to once again explain, look, I'm not okay with your behavior.
Right.
So the first step is an attempt to reiterate. Yeah. If the person still violates it, what you can do is please explain to them the consequences. Imagine in a spousal relationship, let's say there is infidelity. Isn't infidelity one of the most intense forms of boundary violation?
True.
And imagine the spouse is telling, look, we had this agreement. You apologized and I was willing to accept. And the person has once again violated. Now let the person talk about the consequences, no?
Right.
You've already, and if you do not rectify it, maybe I'm going to seek divorce. So one is explain to them the consequences firmly. The third one, if we have meant those consequences genuinely, we need to execute it. Let's say in workplace, there is harassment. You've reiterated you're violating my boundaries and the person didn't stop. You've also told them the consequences if they violate. They have not. Now it's time that we ensure that consequences that needs to happen. Okay. Maybe you're going to complain to the IC committee. IC committee is the internal complaints, the POSH committee. Maybe you do. Yeah. So reiterate, explain the consequences, not happening, ensure that you take the step towards the person reaping those consequences. Sometimes realistically what may happen in personal relationship, avoidance is also a possibility. Professionally also, avoidance is a possibility. Imagine the person is constantly being rude. Maybe the other person is incapable of learning skills to speak gently, respectfully. Where it is possible, avoid. And to avoid, sometimes legal steps can be taken. Okay. Or sometimes interpersonal steps can be taken of just ensuring we don't interact with that person at all. Okay. Yeah, and once you've done that, please ensure you're not feeling guilty about it, because that's another problem.
Right, no? Right. Yeah. So I have last 2 questions for you. One is, I want to know when there is someone with anxiety. Anxiety itself is a very difficult thing to deal with, but they may not realize they're actually crossing boundaries. So then where is the onus on? Like, is it on the person who set the boundaries to constantly keep reminding the other person, or how does that work in such scenario?
So what you're telling is maybe the person who's violating the boundaries themselves have anxiety related concerns, is it? See, now in times where there are mental health concern, it's quite possible that the person with the mental health concern may not understand boundaries as easily as maybe somebody without mental illnesses can. There, the first step, therefore, must be treatment.
Okay.
Let that person heal, come to a state where they are in a position to understand. Like, say, for example, where a person has anxiety, sometimes they may not be able to keep up with time related boundaries, emotional boundaries, and the concern is real. For all pharmacological treatment is needed, a psychiatric medicine might be needed. So therefore, if we recognize that there is a mental health concern, depending on the nature of mental illnesses, it may not always be the easiest to set, communicate, defend boundaries, and what we have said, recognize, respect, and rectify it. So there, the first step has to be treatment. Chetna. There are no shortcuts. There are really no shortcuts. Maybe what I would encourage is, if the other party is aware that there is mental illness, maybe you also be gentle in encouraging the person to go seek the treatment first, and not personalize if there have been boundary violations. I'm not saying you don't matter. Of course you matter.
Right.
But when you see that the other person has mental illness, let's not lose perspective.
Right.
Instead, treatment could be our priority.
Okay. So, you've I'm sure dealt with so many people. Look, have you ever come across anybody, like how I started my this interview? You've said yes where you have to actually say no. So in your area of work, have you seen anybody whose life has actually changed when they've said no, when they had to say no?
So you know that I work in the space of abuse and violence prevention. And when you say people kept saying yes, sometimes to violence, and the moment they said, I've had enough, and they said no, so many people have thrived. For example, my doctoral work was on women who burn themselves. It's called self-immolation. As part of my doctoral work, I looked into the data of 327 women who had burned themselves. Now, most of them were burning themselves because their rights were violated domestically. Domestic violence was the number one the reason why women thought the only way to escape violence was to burn themselves. Can you imagine? Yeah, that was one segment of my doctoral work. But there were three parts. The last part of my doctoral work was to identify women who survived burns. That means they burned themselves and they survived. But I interviewed those women who had become thrivers. Meaning, somebody who would say, way before I burned myself, I didn't know what I was capable of. But then when life gave me an opportunity to survive, when they have thrived, so many of them had become so assertive. When they realized, I've been once again gifted, the life. And many of them were able to draw firm boundaries. By that, what I mean is they no longer took domestic violence, they took legal actions. Legal action is one of the way you're setting a boundary,
Right.
Remember, we said you reiterate. These are women who had put up with violence. They told the consequences, look, I will, but they didn't. They tried to harm themselves to escape violence. But finally, when they said, I've had enough, and then took that boundary marking seriously, taking legal actions, and then prioritizing their own well-being, so many survivors became thrivers. So many became thrivers. So I think these are cases that goes on to prove that it's never too late to set boundaries and defend your boundaries. And when you do that, you just don't survive, you also thrive.
Yeah. I think you answered my last bit of it, because I wanted to say, is it very important? Now we know that what would happen if you don't really set boundaries. So if you have to give one last message to our listeners today or viewers today, what would it be?
I think let's look at boundaries as a life skill that all of us must learn, acquire. And as much as possible, if we are parents, we need to start early. We really need to start early. And the best way to understand boundary is, like I said earlier, boundaries are those spaces where I am able to respect my own self as well as I'm in a position to respect others. One without the other, I don't think we would be effective interpersonal beings. Yeah. Boundaries are not walls. These are bridges that will ensure my safety, my well-being, as well as others' safety and well-being.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ashwini. It was wonderful speaking to you as always. There's
kind.
so much of information. There's so much of understanding that comes through after every podcast I do with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Means a lot. Thanks for choosing this topic.
Thank you. That is all we have for today. Thank you very much.